is Rafi Santo. I'm a learning scientist, and I'm part of the research team that put together the Reclaiming Digital Futures Toolkit. And we're on a webinar here today that's part of a series drawing on best practices that came out of this toolkit. And we'll be focusing in this conversation on staff capacity and professional learning in community-based digital learning programs. And we have three fantastic organizations that are represented here today: DreamYard, Digital Harbor Foundation, and WMCAT. And so I think we'll start just by having each of you go around, just introduce yourself and your position in your organization, and I'll give some context about the project and what we'll be talking about today. So why don't we start with Hillary from DreamYard.
Hi, everybody. It's Hillary Kolos. I'm the Director of Digital Learning at DreamYard in the Bronx.
We'll go down the line. Mike.
Hi, my name is Mike Saunders. I am a teaching artist and program coordinator with the West Michigan Center of Arts and Technology, also known as WMCAT.
And Mary.
Hi, my name is Mary Reisenwitz. I am the Special Projects Manager at the Digital Harbor Foundation in Baltimore, Maryland.
Great. So I'm really glad to be able to talk about this topic today, and really about the broader project that this came from. So the Reclaiming Digital Futures Toolkit, which folks can find at digitallearningpractices.org, was produced through about a year-long process where researchers from NYU and UC Irvine, including myself, June An, and Juan Pablo Sarmiento, worked with 8 amazing organizations from across the country, 3 of which are in front of you here, many others in other contexts and regions: Chicago, Providence, Baltimore is represented, New York. And really what we were doing through the great visionary insight of the Susan Crown Exchange was to think together about what best practices are in community-based digital learning, in the kinds of technology-enhanced but student future-focused community programs that so many young people across the country spend time in to create, to produce, to make, to tinker, and to think about how they might contribute to their communities and to society overall. And the topic that we're going to talk about today that I think is really so important and really under-discussed is the topic of staff capacity and professional learning in the context of these kinds of organizations and programs around digital learning. And we know that professional learning and staff capacity is critical. We know that great programs come from great educators. We also know that in the informal education field and also in the formal education field, there's really a lot of challenges around professional learning and professional development. In specific, in informal learning, there's just a lot of questions around how do we professionalize educators in this space, when you don't have the same kind of formalized system and certifications and we see in formal education. And then you kind of extend it to this area of integrating new digital media that is really critical for young people to understand and be fluid in the 21st century. And that adds another dimension to the challenge of staff capacity, where staff not only need to be amazing educators and mentors, but they also need to be potentially technologically fluent in a lot of emerging media and platforms and techniques. And so what we're going to be doing in the webinar here today is hearing about different ways that organizations that have been around for a really long time and have really figured something out, how they approach these questions of building staff capacity for their digital learning programs, and the ways that they think about what is staff learning, how can it be supported, what are the kind of moves that we can make within our organizations. And this goes up a level from the day-to-day programs that educators are implementing to the part of the organization and the aspects of the organization that ask, how do these educators themselves engage in continuous learning and becoming amazing professionals and mentors. So where I want to start is with you, Hillary, at DreamYard. What I'd like to do there is first to just have you introduce briefly what DreamYard is, and I've got a spate of questions from there. What is DreamYard, and what's the kind of core work that you guys do?
Thanks, Rafi. So at DreamYard, we are located in the Bronx, and we work with Bronx youth and families and schools to build pathways and opportunities through the arts. So we say we're a social justice and arts organization, and then we have kind of a foundation of digital learning and technology as well that we use in our tool set. We work in about 45 schools across the Bronx, K through 12, and do arts integration or arts after school programs. And then we have an art center where we have free after school and Saturday programs. We also have a high school called DreamYard Prep. So we have a lot of different areas in the Bronx that we work, and we're trying to work with young people to give them more access and opportunities in the arts, and also help them like see the change they want to have in their neighborhoods, or also like the things they want to lift up in their neighborhoods, and use the arts and social justice to make that change that they want to see.
Yeah, and the work, I've seen so much of it, and it's really fantastic. And I think sometimes we focus on the programs. You know, obviously here we're going to focus on staff, and I'm really curious: is there a way that you might kind of characterize like who are, you know, DreamYard's educators? Where do they come from? What are they like?
Yeah, so we have a great group of educators. A lot of our staff, our admin staff, are also educators. Many of us are also artists in other forms. We teach a lot of different disciplines, so poetry, theater, music production, fashion, maker. So we have a whole real like diverse range of artists. Most people have been teaching for a while, at least a couple years. Some people have been with us for over 15 years. So we have this incredible range of experience of educators as well. And in terms of like racially and other demographics, I think we're pretty diverse on that scale as well. And more we're trying to work more with alumni. So folks who have come through our programs, folks from the Bronx, who might have started in second grade with us, and now that we're a 25-year organization, they actually are through college and either teaching with us or on staff, which is kind of the dream that eventually most of our staff will be alumni and young people who've come through our programs.
Totally, yeah. I mean, there's something so beautiful, and I've seen it many times when you've got young people that have gone through the programs and they become the educators, and just their ability to understand what a good program is, understand how to relate to young people and their experiences is just really second to none. And one of the things that we found when we were working with you and looking at your organization was that you did a very unique thing when it comes to professional learning, which is that it seemed like there was less of a culture of like, okay, we're going to send our educators out again and again to, external professional development. And I think there might have been some of that we saw, but we saw this really amazing practice of peer-to-peer professional learning, both around your digital learning programs and more broadly. And I'd love to hear what does peer-to-peer professional learning look like at DreamYard, and maybe starting with like going into that, why have you taken this approach?
Yeah, I think so. Before I came to DreamYard, I was a teaching artist for many years all across New York City and a bunch of different organizations. And something I really love about DreamYard is that they take the teaching artist, that's what we call our educators, teaching artists. They take that profession really seriously, and they see it as a profession where you're always learning and you always have ways to give back. So DreamYard really invests in professional development, which I didn't always have in other places where I was. And part of what that is that we actually have like a professional development department. So we have a director of professional development who works across our organization. We have department directors who are basically like master teaching artists, and then even more, who also work in different disciplines. But I also think, we recognize that we have a diverse community and we have a lot that we can learn from each other. So even if you're a music production teaching artist and I'm a fashion teaching artist, there's still things I can learn from watching you. So whether we have a bunch of different forms of professional development, but we do racial equity work here as an admin staff, and that is called Learning Community. And we do bring in outside trainers, every once in a while, but we decided to keep the work going. We had to do it ourselves, right? And we had to we have a steering committee, but then everybody on staff helps lead different meetings that we do and trainings we do around racial equity. And I think we just believe that like you learn best through doing as well, and from teaching others. So in particular for our racial equity work, we thought everyone had to be on board. Everyone has to be invested in sort of learning from each other. And that plays out also as well in our arts and social justice work, that we have so many talented members of our own community, that why not lean on each other, and kind of learn from each other along the way.
And so I know in one of the resources that we wrote up on peer-to-peer professional learning, or on informal digital learning, we highlighted a bunch of the different ways that DreamYard operates around professional development. We talk about peer-led pedagogy groups where kind of learning about new topics relevant to their work and sharing teaching approaches. Also, there's two others that I really would love for you to dive into. One is sort of coaching, where teaching artists sort of observe program classrooms and offer feedback. And the second is sort of the kind of digital documentation of your own pedagogy as a teaching artist. I think these are both really unique approaches that we don't see as much in many organizations.
Yeah, I think it's an ever evolving form here. I think we used to have sort of like master teaching artists and different names and coaches and things like that. And now it's really led to a structure where we have these department directors. So we have a department director of poetry and performance, dance and music, and visual arts and maker. And the folks who run those departments are basically, folks who have been teaching for a really long time, have a lot to offer. And then they meet separately with their different cohorts of teaching artists to do that. And then we also have, for a while, we had a social justice pedagogy coach who was really focused on that, because we wanted to be that social justice approach to be more consistent across the board. But usually those are folks that we hire from within who have been with us for over 5 years, who can go in and observe, have conversations before and after with the teaching artists, offer their expertise, see what resources are needed, what support is needed. And they're really focused on the pedagogical. So we have also other admin supports who are helping with the practical, like I need paintbrushes and I need this and that. But we have folks who are like really focused on pedagogical support and offering that experience, which I think makes a really huge difference.
Yeah, and I'm curious about this practice of having educators digitally document their own pedagogy and how that might lead to circulating best practices across the organization.
Yeah, that's work that we started probably 6 or 7 years ago now. Feels like a long time ago, in particular with our partners at Parsons School of Design and also Mouse, which is another organization here in New York City. We found that building up this practice, both for our educators and our young people, to create digital portfolios using slideshows or blogs, or even just like a Google Doc with a digital journal. How can we have both the educators and the young people taking pictures of their work, or like doing a work in progress, or writing a little reflection along the way, so that at the end of the class, both the teacher and the teacher and the young people can look back and see where they've come from, because our classes are 25 weeks over basically the whole school year. They can really show like, oh, I did a lot over this time. And they can go back and clean it up and create, something that they can share to a larger audience. But I think we've been trying to figure out, and we still have a lot more to learn, but how to really integrate that into the practice so that the educators can look back and even have a portfolio of their own classes or their own growth across DreamYard. And that digital documentation, which could be video, text, photos, any way to kind of show their journey as well and their growth as an educator.
Yeah, and one of the things I really like about that practice that I think a lot of other organizations can learn from is the idea of having educators use digital tools to document their pedagogy, so that they grow in their pedagogy when they do that, but they also grow in their digital skill set at the same time. So it feels like a really great way to build capacity along multiple dimensions of the kinds of things that we want educators in our organizations to get really good at. And so it's sort of like the means becomes part of the ends there too. I want to move on to hear from Mary at the Digital Harbor Foundation. And first, Mary, just give us an overview of what kind of work happens at Digital Harbor?
Sure. So the Digital Harbor Foundation has sort of two main components. We have our tech center, which is located physically in Baltimore, Maryland, where we operate a number of different programs for youth. We have elementary, middle, and high school programs, and those are in sort of more intense learning experiences for youth. We have two pathways in digital fabrication as well as computer science, and those sort of range from your survey courses, introductory, sort of exploratory level, into more advanced coursework and youth employment programs. And then we have our Center of Excellence, which aims to really, we don't look to expand our physical footprint as much as we hope to expand our our reach for educators. So we support a number of formal educators through workshops, informal educators also through workshops, and we have a number of sort of expansion projects in the works right now where we're supporting sites both locally and nationally in sort of getting their informal learning programs off the ground, more with emphasis on technology, similar pathways to the ones that we offer currently.
So tell me about the Digital Harbor Foundation, the educators, like who's on the ground doing the work? What does the staff look like?
So in terms of our youth courses, we have who we call program specialists, and that's a wide variety of adult staff that are facilitating our courses on a daily basis. So for each course that we offer, we have two facilitators. We love to have like a 2-to-20 ratio. That's our ideal ratio. And they come from a wide variety of backgrounds. We talk a lot about this sort of ideal trifecta between artists, former formal educators, and technologists. So those program specialists come from each of those backgrounds.
And through the work that we did together, you wrote up this, you and many of your colleagues at Digital Harbor wrote up this amazing resource called Building Staff Capacity Through Peer Learning and Passion at the Digital Harbor Foundation. And I'm so curious, I know there is so much richness there, but I'm curious if you could kind of bring us in to a little bit of the ways that these principles of peer learning and passion have played out in the professional development approach that you've tried to cultivate at Digital Harbor.
Sure. So sort of similar to what DreamYard's approach is, we have a very strong learn by doing methodology, and we often say always be learning. It's sort of this culture of always staying on your feet and learning as much as possible. I think that we offer a ton of different youth courses. We've spent a lot of time writing and developing a lot of content. So for our staff, that's on a day-to-day basis, that's the learning that they're doing is constantly preparing for courses. And for a lot of folks, it can be an intimidating thing, but I think a lot of us thrive on the pace of really in many ways we're staying 2 weeks ahead of our youth in terms of 2 weeks ahead in terms of course content. So we've mastered that far, and everything else is sort of learning as we go. And for instance,
so when you say 2 weeks ahead, do you mean that if I'm an educator, I'll complete all of the same projects 2 weeks ahead of time?
Yeah, that's the biggest way that our staff learn is, since we spend so much time actually writing the content for our youth, we have our staff go through that content in the same way. And of course, we have on the even further back, our staff that are actually writing that content are doing a ton of research and exploration. But for our frontline staff, our facilitators, they see the same content that our youth do, which is really great, especially if those facilitators are not familiar with that content already. For instance, I was on a JavaScript course, and that's not at all my background. I come from a fine arts background. So I went through the same course content that our youth took, in 2 weeks. And it was useful for me as a new learner to remember very recently what I struggled with and what was challenging for me. That's one advantage to sort of the fast pace is I know I can remember really easily what I struggled with and sort of be flexible for youth who might stumble in the same areas.
Yeah, I think that's really, that is really powerful. It's easy to forget what it's like to be a novice. And I feel like there's a real loss that happens when you get to know something much better that maybe gets in the way of
For
the
sure.
ability to be a good educator.
Yeah, and I think that we have some folks who write our content who everybody for the most part is self-taught in a lot of what they do here. They may come from a technical background, but maybe not the same technical background, and there's a lot of learning that's happening all the time. But for our content writers, they have a lot more of that experience just because they've built it up over years and years of writing content. So in the same way that our youth interface with facilitators to sort of find the middle ground and figure out, problem solve as they're learning through it, that there's similar communication that goes between our frontline facilitators and our content developers as that content is being developed. They'll do the first 2 weeks or however much of a course and have meetings and find clarity. And so there's a lot of collaboration there. It's really valuable.
Yeah, so I'm curious if there's any particular kind of maybe story or something you want to highlight as how some of this culture of learning has kind of played out. Either, I know you mentioned your own experience with that JavaScript course, or other things that come to mind that you feel like kind of exemplify what this approach looks like in practice, and maybe how it kind of works and benefits the staff.
Sure. So we had a course where students used Raspberry Pi to create a web server, and in the Bears forum, it was part technical hardware learning and it was part web development. And in that course, our we had sort of the technical structure that was built out and written by our content developer, and then it became the responsibility for our frontline staff not only to become comfortable with those technical components but find ways to engage our youth along the way. And one thing that stood out for me was how they made the instead of just building a simple sort of basic boring web page, which is very simple to do, and that's often what you find when teaching yourself web development. We had youth create scavenger hunts for themselves, or for their peers, for their classmates, and that became an interesting way for them to get to know each other, but also be engaged with the content they were actually writing for their web pages instead of just building, saying title, body, text, sort of having these placeholders. They were able to develop it themselves, but that was a collaboration between our frontline facilitators and our content developers to see like, oh, hey, this is a good idea, this is a good option for them to learn.
Right. So there's this kind of interplay, it sounds like, in terms of the professional learning at DHF, where you have folks that are really centrally involved in curriculum development, folks that are kind of doing facilitation and implementation, and then the experience of having that happen, creating this feedback loop between the frontline staff who are figuring new things out that the content developers and the curriculum developers hadn't thought of, and then bringing it back in this kind of iterative way. And so I think that there's a nice way of thinking about, learning by doing there that's not just about the individual capacity of a given educator, but is about the kind of collective capacity and advancing program models by listening to the learning that is taking place with the teaching artists and with instructors that are, kind of really doing the everyday work with young people and seeing what they're responding to and seeing what they don't respond to.
For sure. And that building those youth relationships are really the foundation for how we adapt course content over time. A lot of that, a lot of the personalized projects that facilitators sort of improvise, they find, this youth has an interest in anime, they're going to build out a web page about anime, but that can be something that we adapt to the next version of the course that we offer. We can make it more specialized because our staff build really strong relationships with our youth and then improvise sort of on the fly. And
yeah, I think that this relationship between staff learning and organizational learning collectively is really interesting. So I want to move over to properly the Midwest, to Mike Saunders from WMCAT, West Michigan Center for Arts and Technology. And Mike, just to start off, I'd love for you to just share with us about WMCAT and what it does and what its programs are like.
Yeah, the West Michigan Center of Arts and Technology, that's where I work at. I'll speak mostly about the creative program and the GRPS after school program that we run, but to let you know a little bit about the entire organization, we have a few different branches. They all kind of play into each other at some level. The creative program, its main thing is the after school program for Grand Rapids Public School students. It's totally tuition free. We also have a workforce development program that provides career training in the medical field. Anyone who's 18 years old and has a high school diploma or GED and is on some form of state assistance can take a class in medical coding, medical billing, and pharmacy tech. We also do a program now for 18 to 24-year-olds. It's called Step Year. It's for students who maybe have graduated from high school and don't have a clear path planned out for them. That's just a paid internship program where they work with a Project Wayfinder curriculum to kind of find some focus in their life, and then they get placed in some kind of relevant career field that they might have some interest in a paid internship. We also have all of our social enterprises, which in some ways play with the creative program. We have a screen print shop, which is now staffed by 2 former WMCAT teen students. Our production manager and graphic designer there are full-time employees, and they came out of our teen program. And then we also have Public Agency, which is a design thinking consultancy firm. So WMCAT is a pretty expansive organization in what the work we're trying to do in the community, all with the support of creating a culture of opportunity, a specific lens on ending racialized inequity in Grand Rapids, which is a pretty tall order, but we're up for it. It's one of our missions. I particularly work in the creative programs, which I said is part of the after-school program, but we're also running different programming. Some of the video production classes I teach have turned into a social enterprise class, where in those we're doing work for different nonprofit foundations around Grand Rapids that wish to highlight the type of, like for instance, the Weggy Foundation is a organization in Grand Rapids which funds a lot of environmental causes. They have need for video production, and now they're contracting with the high school students. So it's wonderful for me to be able to see the students monetize some of their skills and find a career path.
Yeah, and there's thanks for that great overview, Mike. And I think one of the things that's coming to mind as you share about that is just, a lot of community-based organizations just play such an integral role, and really many different integral roles in how they're connecting youth to community, how they're connecting, you guys have adult programs, you guys have social enterprise programs, you guys do organizational consulting for other organizations. Just the ways that you're connected are so myriad. And as new programs evolved, the staff capacity and the institutional capacity to implement them changes. And one thing I know that you guys do, and really we've been hearing it sort of throughout this call, is focusing on having really talented teaching artists that play a role. And we know that this is a very common practice in a lot of community-based organizations that focus on kind of arts and maker and digital learning and media production. And I really just want to hear from you, and I know you're a practicing teaching artist. I'm just curious about why do teaching artists play kind of such a critical role when it comes to staffing and capacity for the kinds of programs you do?
So why the teaching artists are important here, and I think that's relevant to the conversation that's been going on about the staff professional development. It adds a component that our staff here at WMCAT is comprised of teaching artists, and these are people who, as their jobs, they are graphic designers, they are photographers, they are consultants for fashion brands. They make a substantial portion of their income selling ceramics or playing music. So I feel like that our teaching artists here, they're professionally engaged with the different disciplines that they're working in, it's intrinsically part of why why we stay engaged with the mediums, right? We practice these things. Myself, I work in filmmaking, and I had a movie come out this last year, and I was the production designer on it. So I stay up, on what is happening in production design. I wish to practice these skills, and I feel like it's a very intrinsic thing with everyone on our staff that they want to stay up with what's going on. Kaylee, who teaches our video game production class, she works and designs video games, so she wants to stay relevant within that field. So I think that we have teaching artists, and using that model leads to just an intrinsic desire to stay relevant in the field that you're practicing in or creating in. Does that answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I as you're talking, it brings to mind, this idea of this continued connection to these different industries and these different disciplines. I feel like often in education, we really think, rightfully about like how to, professionalizing the role of educators and education as a field and having it be taken really seriously. And what's interesting to me about teaching artists partly is that there are these boundary spanners between fields, right? They're both teachers as well as artists, obviously by the name, but that means that they maintain social capital across these two spaces. And for young people, that might mean that they can gain access to things that somebody who's an educator entirely and not a practicing artist wouldn't have those institutional connections, wouldn't have that social capital. And I'm curious if you maybe have any stories, whether it's from your own experience or somebody else in the organization of really leveraging your social capital to kind of open doors for young people.
Sure, I think that's that really nails a lot of it. With having the teaching artist model, for example, we did a series of concerts last year called WMCAT on Tour. And that was an incredibly easy thing to put together that an organization otherwise might struggle with, being like, oh, we need to get these students to write songs and then go out to venues and play music at these venues. But that with myself on staff, and then Theo Nadwale and Brandon Copeland, who are all musicians, all have great relationships with the venues, are able then to not only work with the students to actually write, encourage them to develop their songs, find their voice, show them, oh, this is how you do a power chord, or this is a production trick in Fruity Loops to get that sweet sound that you want. But then they can also authentically connect them to a music venue that is, out of reach for most high school students to ever set up a show at. But then even, I guess maybe someone from an education background who hadn't just played there last week or hadn't, had a sellout show the few months before, we're able to provide and give access to some of those platforms for our students. And that goes all across all of our labs. I'm thinking about our fashion lab. Our teaching artist has a great relationship with the Grand Rapids Art Museum, and they allow that for the venue for the fashion show. And it was wonderful. We did our documentary Rhythm and Race. We were able to screen that in 3 different theaters across Grand Rapids, and that's because of the fact that as a teaching artist, some of the films that I've made have played at those theaters. So there's already those relationships intact between our organization and a number of other, what's considered, I guess, like a legitimate venue. Sometimes high school students, they get their work on display. They do the talent show at the end of the year, and then it kind of was like a high school thing. I think WMCAT does an incredible job of providing a real platform in the city for students to display their work right next to other teaching, or to other artists, to other working artists that are out there in the city.
I love that. And I think that it really highlights that this is really not just about skills and of educators and how good they are at pedagogy or how good they are at building relationships, both of which are incredibly important, but capacity as partly how connected you are to community, how connected you are to institutions, and what that means. Dropping somebody in there that has certain skills doesn't necessarily do all of the work to create equitable outcomes and promote student voice in the way that I think you're talking about, Mike, that we would want to hope would come out of these kinds of programs for young people. Obviously, there's a lot of like great things about it, but I want to open this up to everyone here, partly because I know that, we can talk about, unicorns and butterflies and rainbows around, professional learning and staff capacity in informal programs, but teaching artists in particular, I think there are some challenges to this, having teaching artists as a staffing structure and as a key part of an organizational model. And I'd love to just hear, from your guys' perspectives, what some of those challenges are, and maybe some things that, you've started to do in your organizations that have maybe helped to address some of those tensions.
So I can start with some thoughts about the teaching artist structure. So our teaching artists are almost all part-time. We have a couple full-time staff who also teach, which has its own pluses and minuses. But some of our folks teach, 1 or 2 classes a week, and some have like 5 plus. But we always make sure that every teaching artist is included in some level of professional development, because we think it's important to their own growth and for the young people in the classrooms with them. And one thing in particular that we do is we make it clear that the teaching artists will be paid for their time in professional development. So everyone at the beginning of the year has a retreat, and then a set schedule of different professional developments that they'll attend. It could be a conference day, which is sort of like a full day of like different workshops. It could be something that we have called Social Justice Pedagogy Team, where we come together for our art center. We usually bring in a social justice pedagogy speaker, and then also do some work on our own. But then everyone has like a really clear set of professional development options in front of them in a menu, and the number of hours they should be in professional development. And they're said, this is a part of your salary. You're getting paid to come and be trained and to work with each other. So I think that's an important thing to say too, to not act like, oh, this is something we're gifting you. Like they're working by being there, and they're often balancing like teaching artists in other organizations or their own artistic practice. And we really need to value the teaching artist's time and to make sure that they're also coming with like a present mind and feeling valued in their work. So I just think that's an important thing to like, one, really clear over the year what you're expected to attend for professional development and making that range of it, and also saying like, and you're being paid for this. Like, we value your time here. It's been really important for us.
Yeah. Mike, was there something else you wanted to add on this, on kind of the challenges and maybe how we address them for teaching artists?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons. I think there's tons, and a lot of the challenges do with just the logistics of, especially after school program, that weird time, like, oh, are you available from 3 to 6 today, every day at this time? That's going to be like 20 hours a week. It's a part-time position, even if you're teaching 2 classes at our organization, and it's a pretty big commitment with the awkward scheduling. But then also it's like a huge emotional commitment, like it's huge. Like, you form really deep relationships with the students here. You form good, deep relationships with your coworkers. People definitely put in, it's that intrinsic passion to create, and you start working with people and it feels good. And then like, oh no, now it feels bad. I worked 1,000 hours this week and I'm not getting paid very much. And I think that's like not anything new to anyone who is around this type of work, but I don't think it's something that should be accepted. And so I'm glad that we have this forum to discuss and think through some of that, because it's definitely a challenge. Another challenge that we've had here at WMCAT, we've had some fantastic artists that have been on our staff. I'm thinking of actually two of the people who worked in our, 3 of the people who worked in our music lab have just had opportunities to play music in Los Angeles or move to Detroit. And this is like, oh, well, my music is my thing. So they're going to pursue their careers, and rightfully so. They're amazing artists. So having that, retention can be difficult. Those have been definitely key problems with having and retaining teaching artists. One thing, we do have a pretty cool arts community here. The woman who teaches our ceramics class, she is like, I really wish Eliza could be here for this, because she is such a pro. She works at the Cook Arts Center, which is another after-school arts program, and she is one of the most an emotional wizard with these high school students, and she could be like a huge value on professional development on the education portion. But then I worry that Eliza is going to leave because she's getting, all these wonderful master's programs out of state, and programs that she can go and create art all over the place with. So that I think that does go back partially to the pay component. Can you make this a sustainable job for someone who has this level of talent, and then the artistic and creative talent, but then also has this ability to connect and be a compassionate person and work with students, and be able to deal with some of the emotional stress that comes with that. It's difficult to find and maintain all of those different factors. So yeah, that would be my thoughts.
Thanks, Mike. I don't know if there's anyone. I don't know if Mary, you want to add something on this before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo. We feel very similarly. I think the turnover and logistics are the biggest challenges, and I would say that the talent that teaching artists bring, as well as the drive and energy that they bring, that's definitely what is appealing to us as facilitators, or bringing them on as facilitators. But at the same time, it is definitely a double-edged sword, and in that, we have to work around the rest of their lives and their practice, and make sure, like you said, that they're not working crazy hours all the time, and something we've just started to sort of wrap our heads around, and we're at the beginning of stages of thinking about our facilitators operating in our space, whether they're teaching artists or whether they're technologists, whoever they might be, thinking about the program specialist position as a short-term fellowship, that not going into the relationship expecting it to be a forever experience, and that forces us as an organization to be more adaptable and really build out and document a lot of the training and cultural learning that we do, so that when we bring new people on, which it's sort of, we're coming to this point where we're realizing this is an inevitability, and that's actually a healthy part of our organizational life cycle, is for people who are very talented and motivated to find work beyond, because that just builds this art ecosystem. And like Mike was saying, then our youth have greater access within the community.
Yeah, and there's clearly lots of benefits, as you're mentioning, to some of that kind of movement that happens for teaching artists, that might, if they have strong enough relationship with young people, their new opportunities create new opportunities for young people. So I want to close with sort of a lightning round, and I feel like the lightning round, I want to just be your advice to other organizations that you see as kind of your peers in doing this particular form of digital learning that's very rooted in community, very rooted in student interest and passion, very focused on achieving equity and social justice. And speaking to this question of if you were to give advice to these organizations, to your peers, what do you want them to keep in mind when it comes to professional learning, building a culture of learning, building a culture where staff capacity is really high, and where you're able to do the kinds of programs that you feel like are necessary for the communities that you're part of? And I'll start going down the line in the order that we did over the course of the webinar. So I'll start with Hillary, going over to Mary, and then to Mike.
So I think just thinking about other folks out there trying to figure this out. One is that we're all trying to figure it out, and we're all changing up our approach to it all the time. I think in the past couple of years, the best thing I've learned is just to create the space and the community for your educators to learn from each other. So yes, bring in outside speakers, take people out onto trips and things like that. But a lot of your professional development can just be that time for them to talk to each other, share best practices, share things that are inspiring them, even if it's different disciplines or different tools that people are using. Think interdisciplinarily about it, and I can present an idea to our team, and sometimes it takes, fire with one or two people. But if they start showing each other their work and saying like, oh, that thing Hillary talked about last time, this is what I did with it. And then like they all see that it's possible. So as much as you can to get your educators to light sparks within each other, to observe each other teaching, to be on some kind of email chain where they're sharing resources or something like that. My job as like someone who does professional development is, I feel like, to create space and to bring in that inspiration, to have them sort of like light the fire amongst themselves, and because they're really the experts in the end.
Oh, love that. Going on to Mary.
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson that I can speak for myself, and I think this applies to others too, is really to be adaptable in the learning environment. And the best analogy that I learned about this was to think of yourself as a facilitator as more of a thermometer reading the temperature in the room rather than like being the thermostat that's setting. It's easy as a facilitator to go into a learning environment and say, okay, this is what we're going to get done. You have all these, big plans and whatever, but often needs change. The environment, the energy can be totally different day to day. So really responding to that as much as possible and adapting has really been the key for us. And we find that our programs develop and flourish the most when we're responding to youth needs directly.
Closing us off and taking us home, Mike.
I think as far as professional development going for teaching artist groups is to get them connected to other teaching artists in different spaces doing similar type of work. I guess I'm just going to echo that. I found participating in the digital learning community is been hugely illuminating to see what other people are doing. I certainly took many ideas that other people were doing and tried to apply them in our classroom, and small classroom activities to the big scope stuff of what we're doing with our social enterprise work now. So I think getting out and connecting with other organizations that do similar work can have like a really kind of makes you feel like you're not out there alone doing some kind of crazy thing, that there are other people out there mentoring young people and connecting them to opportunities in different ways that maybe you haven't thought of yet. I think that has been critical. And then if it's like a whole staff kind of thing too, making sure that people aren't left out from that, that can be definitely a somewhat alienating thing if someone feels as though that they didn't get to participate or see that, or even like follow up for people who weren't included in that. Because I think having your staff having kind of a clear direction for the whole program is really important too, because it can be difficult if you have people who are pulling in different ways and kind of not on board with the total vision. That can be troublesome too. So just making sure your staff feels supported, not only organizationally, but then feels like a support from outside of that and understands the importance of the work they're doing.
Yeah, that kind of centering around core values as really part of having a good professional learning culture. And I love the other thing you started with, which is a subject near to my heart, which is, participating in broader networks, right? And I think one of the things that was so edifying for me about our work together in the producing the Reclaiming Digital Futures Toolkit was that we got to spend so much time in community, on calls, in person, at strategy and knowledge building sessions that we were able to put together for the group. And it really is in those contexts that knowledge production happens and knowledge circulation happens, and we kind of see that there's a broader field. And that's really, I think, if we're going to leave something to folks that are watching, I think that is part of what we try to convey in a lot of the resources, is just the richness that can happen. You just start to dig in to a lot of the everyday work of organizations that are doing digital learning work, and see all the different issues and stuff that might seem on some levels like, maybe it seems a little more mundane. It's kind of like, how do you do professional learning? But really seeing, once you get a group of people, a group of organizations in a room, we're like, no, this is what makes our stuff good. Like, no, the recruitment practices, it might seem like such a small thing, but the recruitment practices, we actually need good techniques around that. Or, partnerships, like partnerships, like, this is such a, maybe kind of technical or organizational thing, but it really is what ultimately you add all these different pieces up, and you get some of the best and most equitable outcomes, and really get communities that are uplifted. And there's no silver bullet, and I think that's part of what we were trying to convey. So I do first want to thank Hillary, Mary, and Mike from DreamYard, Digital Harbor Foundation, and WMCAT. And then again, encourage folks that are watching this to go check out their resources. People really opened up their organizations to share what they knew about doing this work, and I think they did it in a beautiful way. You can find Reclaiming Digital Futures at digitallearningpractices.org, and you can find contact on that site for all the organizations, and you can get in touch if there's anything that inspired you that you want to learn more about. So thanks again, and have a good day.